going to tell you a little bit about what excites me in my work and my research and my interactions with patients and science. And so I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking about and dreaming about and doing in my life, and what I think is really presenting a paradigm shift for psychiatry. So every now and then I start off a talk by telling people how common depression is and how disabling it is. And I recently consulted the World Health Organization statistics, and I saw that last time I had looked this a couple years ago, depression was #1 for women in the world for disability, and for men it was in the top 10. I recently looked, and it's become #1 for the global disease burden, disability, unipolar depressive disorder, severe depression. And not only is it #1 in terms of disability in the world, depression ranks so disabling. If you look down here, it's ranked as a 7, which is, along with psychosis, severe migraine, quadriplegia, and terminal stage cancer, it's considered that disabling. And that's really powerful to me. I didn't grow up knowing anybody with depression. My story sort of starts in Michigan, where I was born, and I did undergraduate, and I thought, oh, psychology is really interesting. I'm interested in people's stories. I'm interested in the brain. But then the summer before I was about to graduate, I went to Boston, and I stayed with my father, who had a cousin who's a psychiatrist, that guy Chester Sweat there. And his father and his father were all doctors, but we didn't have any doctors in my family. So I got to go stay with him, and I worked as a volunteer research assistant at McLean Hospital, and I met people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression. And I was just really compelled and struck with this disorder. Never thought that I'd go on to medical school. Thought psychology is what I wanted to do, but I really felt I need to learn more about the brain. So I went to medical school. I went to Penn, and before I went to medical school, I spent some time in Pittsburgh doing research, and there again, the universe sort of gave me an opportunity to study depression. And so there I was meeting people, talking to people, learning about treatments and the biology of the brain that relates to depression. So I went from there on to medical school at Penn, and then I went on to residency at Yale, and there was this great research environment, and I started to feel like, wow, you know, I can do something to really make a difference for this disorder, which is so severe and so disabling. So when I left there, I came to Butler Hospital, where I now work, and I was going to say live and work. Feels like I live there, because I work about 10 hours a day, and so I really, in my experiences becoming a psychiatrist, have sort of wanted to dig in and find out what is there, what's available to help patients with depression, and what treatments do we have. And as you know, for a long time, all we've really had in psychiatry is medications. We have lots of pills, many different kinds of pills, particularly for depression. And we have talking therapy, which here's good old Freud. And then what I learned about what you do when those things don't work is ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which some people call shock treatment. And that was actually considered the gold standard treatment, I was taught, for depression. When nothing else works, that's what we've got to work. We can put electricity on the head and put a patient under anesthesia, and electricity will kind of spread through the skin and the skull and go in those cracks in your head and get down into the brain tissue, and cause the brain tissue to fire, and it'll sort of spread through the brain until it gets to this area of the brain called the motor cortex, and that would make you have a seizure if you were awake. So an anesthesiologist is there, and they put a little bit of a device in to help you breathe, and they give you some muscle relaxants so your body doesn't have movements when it's shaking. And they watch on a strip. They have electrodes that record off of your head, so they know your body's having a seizure even though it's not moving. And that's what it looks like on the strip there. The thing that says EEG, that's when the person's actually having a seizure in their brain, and their body would be shaking if they weren't having a muscle relaxant anesthesia, and then it's over. And that kind of a treatment is considered the very best we have for depression when it doesn't get better with talking therapy and pills. And I remember reflecting that it was a shame that was the very best we had. It seemed like we could do better, and why was that the very best we had? You know, why would putting electricity on the brain be better than all of the other treatments that we had available? And one of the big things that bothered me about ECT was this, and for those who are old enough to know, that's Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it was the stigma. It was that getting ECT seemed so barbaric and required to go into a hospital and do something that was that was very stigmatizing, and people wouldn't want to even go get the treatment because they were so concerned about the stigma. And the side effects associated with electroconvulsive therapy included memory loss. So I turned my energy as a researcher and a doctor into working on the development of new treatments that would help people with depression. Treatments that would be able to impact the brain like ECT, like electroconvulsive therapy, through energy, but not ones that would have the same side effects and the same stigma. And the first one that I got involved in is this. This is called vagus nerve stimulation. And vagus nerve stimulation is when a doctor or a surgeon implants a little pacemaker in your chest wall right there on the left side, and that's what it looks like. And then underneath your skin there's a little wire that's tunneled up into some electrodes that wrap around a nerve in your neck on the left side. And that's called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve has fibers that carry messages up to the brain. It's got 80% of its fibers carry messages up to the brain. And this is a device that could be surgically implanted and then programmed by a doctor like me. And I have devices like this, and I do this with my patients who have these devices. Hand them a little wand, they put it up to their chest, and I dial in the parameters for stimulation, and then when they take the wand down, the device is going on, and it's stimulating this little nerve in their neck, on for 30 seconds, off for 5 minutes, on for 30 seconds, off for 5 minutes, while they're awake and eating and sleeping and doing anything. Vagus nerve stimulation goes through this nerve in the brain up to some other centers in the brain, and from there impacts other circuits in the brain that are involved in emotions and depression. And this treatment is also approved by the FDA for treatment of epilepsy because it has an anti-seizure effect. So I was very excited to try something new, to be involved in something new, and patients who I worked with and others that were referred from the community came, and we did clinical trials, and we implanted these devices in people, and we had, as you do in a clinical trial, half of them get the real thing and the other half get some sort of like a placebo, which in case of a device is like a sham. You fake like you're turning it on, and they don't really get the treatment. At the end of the day, at the end of 6 or 12 weeks, whatever the period of the trial is, you're looking to see are the people who got the real treatment better or worse than those who got the fake treatment. And in fact, there really was no difference in this trial. This trial was being done around the country as well as under my direction at Butler Hospital. Eventually, after a series of sort of lobbying and secondary analyses, the FDA did approve this treatment, vagus nerve stimulation for depression. But it doesn't really matter because no insurance company will pay for it. Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial insurance companies, they all say there isn't enough evidence that it works for us to do this, to pay for this. So then we moved on. The next study I got involved in was deep brain stimulation. There's a lot of excitement about deep brain stimulation. I had heard that Michael J. Fox had deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, and that seemed like a really cool thing. It turned out that wasn't exactly the right story, but there had been some studies in patients with obsessive compulsive disorder, and they had shown that when they put electrodes in the brain, now here, it's a little hard to see, you've got 2 battery packs there, each of them going underneath the skin and coming around, and then there's 2 metal electrodes that are implanted deeply in the brain, right? And this also, you can program this just the way it looked in the last picture with one of these little wands. The patient puts it up, and then you take it down. And so this is a big deal surgery. This is a surgery that requires a neurosurgeon because they're going to put burr holes in your skull and insert these wires in just the right place. And then you turn it on, you can stimulate these different areas of the brain. And based on the work with obsessive compulsive disorder, where they had observed that, no, the obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms got a little bit better, but the mood got better, the depression got better. So we thought, okay, well maybe this is going to be a good treatment for depression. And we did a pilot study in 5 people, and they seemed to really get better. So then ultimately we had to do the real science. We had to do the sham controlled trial where half the people get the fake treatment and the others get the real treatment. And that's going to be the only way we could tell whether this was going to work. And so together with a couple other doctors around the country, we had some patients enter into this research clinical trial, get these devices implanted, and lo and behold, at the end of 3 months, we realized that it didn't work. And to this day, people still think deep brain stimulation is the sexiest thing for treating depression, even though we've proven that it didn't work. Now, this is just at one point when we had a lot of interest and a lot of excitement about deep brain stimulation. people were really thinking, wow, you know, if you could just get into the brain. And that's been one of my struggles as a scientist. It's like if you're a cardiologist, you can get into the heart, you can go with a catheter into it, you can do open heart surgery. If you're doing something with the liver, you can get there. But it's very hard to get into the brain, right? You can't just open it up and get in there. And when you do, it's a big deal. And you better know what you're doing. It better be worth it. So you wouldn't want to undertake these sorts of treatments lightly. And after having been a researcher and had patients of mine have these vagus nerve stimulators implanted and these deep brain stimulators implanted, I had all these patients out there with hardware in their body and really no hard evidence that it was working very well. So the next thing that came along really excited me. And the next thing is what I really am committed to now and doing with most of my time, and that's called transcranial magnetic stimulation. And what's cool about this one, which is abbreviated TMS, is one, there's no surgery involved, and there's no hardware implanted in anyone's head. What we're doing now is using magnetic energy pulses that come off something called a coil. It's got a bunch of wires wound around, and magnetic energy pulses. And what's neat about magnetic energy, different than electricity, is it goes unimpeded directly through your scalp and your skull tissues to your brain without spreading around the way electricity does. Remember when patients had electroconvulsive therapy, they put the electrodes here and it would spread all over the place and they'd have a seizure. Well, with this you don't have a seizure because I can put the pulses of magnetic energy in the front part of the brain and stay away from the back part that would cause you to have a seizure if you had stimulation there. And so we started doing clinical trials. Clinical trials where half of the patients were getting this treatment and half of the patients were getting a fake treatment. And this is a different kind of treatment because, you know, patients just drive themselves in and sit in a chair and have this thing pulse on their head for a half hour and go home and come back the next day and do it 5 days a week for a number of weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And this one demonstrated that it worked. It demonstrated that it was efficacious in the first trial. But people said, oh, well, you know, the device company paid for that. Maybe it doesn't really work. And the next thing that happened was our taxpayer dollars. The National Institutes of Health conducted a trial of this treatment for severe depression, for depression that doesn't get better with standard treatments. And it worked too. And a number of other studies followed it and followed it and followed that. Before you know it, in late 2008, we had the first ever FDA-approved TMS device to treat depression. We opened up a clinic in Butler Hospital. At this point, there are probably 600 clinics around the country where you can get TMS therapy for depression. And this one was so good that I thought, this is a game changer. This is one I want to get behind. And for the first time in my career as a physician and a researcher, I decided to really get involved in advocacy and see if we could get Medicare to pay for it. So it wouldn't become a spa treatment that people in Manhattan could get with a cocktail and a pedicure. This needed to be medical treatment. It's a brain disorder. And so I worked very hard to get Medicare to look at the evidence and had help from people like Felice Fryer from the Projo, the Providence Journal, who would write stories about TMS therapy and people who would tell their stories. So we got Medicare, and then we worked hard and got to play pretend lawyer and represent my patients in their appeals and their administrative law judge hearings. And one by one, won all those battles until we had the first ever policy in New England for TMS therapy. And then we had to go through all the commercial insurers and do the same, and then Medicaid. And I'm happy to tell you right now that Rhode Island is the only state in the country where everybody is covered with their insurance to get this treatment. So that's very exciting to me. And this is such a where, you know, scientists that did the work, the patients that, you know, all traveled in a van with me and went to Boston to go give their testimony and present the evidence. And since then, a number of other companies have come along and done more studies and made more TMS devices. And now that there are more of them, there's more access, there's more awareness, it's driving down the cost of this treatment, there's more public acceptance. And not only that, these treatments are moving into other disorders. So the next one that you might see come out might be this one. This is a treatment for Alzheimer's or early dementia. And what happens here is while you get your brain stimulated, you're doing some memory tests on a screen. And by having the pulses of energy come into your brain while you're doing that, you're reinforcing the learning and the memory that's happening, and it improves working memory and prevents deterioration. Well, the last couple things I'm going to say is that now that I've found something that I think is amazing, it's a game changer, It started in depression, it's going to go into other disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. There's a lot of work happening in all those areas. Also things like Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. The fact that FDA has given permission for a TMS company to do a trial in this country for smoking cessation, and there's one for obesity as well. So I really do think this is going to be a paradigm shift for us. And not only will people be sitting under these devices like the people that come to my clinic 5 days a week, but now we're working on developing treatments that you might be able to take and use at home. This is a trial we did with a little device, and this one reads your brain's own alpha waves, and it synchronizes the pulses to your own alpha waves. So it's customized. Yours might go at 12 hertz, yours might go at 8 hertz. The pulses will be uniquely individualized. And after finishing that trial and determining that it worked, that the sham, people who got the sham treatment didn't get better, and those who got the active treatment did, the company has now said, hey, maybe we can take that whole device and stick it in a helmet, something people could use at home. That would be more convenient. And that's very exciting to me, to think not only do we have newer treatments that work differently and work better, but we might be able to get some that people can use at home. So this is where my story both ends and continues and begins, which is with a sort of thanks to the people who have inspired me. How can I do that? In my closing moment. Can you get me back to slideshow? Maybe not. There have been so many people who have been brave and bold and told their stories and been willing to go out on a limb and talk about their experience with TMS therapy. Martha Rhodes wrote a book about it called 3,000 Pulses, and one of my patients recently bought a bunch of these books that are available at Butler Hospital for anyone who wants them. My patients who've been willing to have themselves interviewed in photographs and be in public places about their experience with TMS, and patients who have put messages online in various ways expressing themselves and what the treatment means to them. And that all means a great deal to me. It's been something that's impacted my journey so much to see people who are so sick after so many decades of treatments that didn't work get so much better. Really a very, very powerful way. So I'm very excited about magnetic stimulation, about what it's going to bring for depression and many other mental illnesses. Thank you for your attention.